The room was in absolute silence when Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell entered, escorted by two naval police officers. Her footsteps echoed on the cold marble floor, while dozens of stares pierced through her, some with contempt, others with morbid curiosity, few with something that seemed like reluctant respect. She didn't look at any of them. She kept her chin up, hands steady, uniform impeccable despite the handcuffs she wore on her wrists. Sarah Mitchell was a Navy SEAL, with 12 years of exemplary service, decorated 3 times for bravery and combat, responsible for 17 classified missions of absolute success. And now she was there, before a court-martial, accused of grave insubordination, direct disobedience of orders, and putting civilians at risk during military operation. The prosecution was asking for 15 years in Leavenworth and complete dishonor. What nobody in that room knew yet was that in 48 hours, that same woman would walk out not as a criminal, but as a national hero. This is the story of how it all happened. 6 weeks before the trial, Sarah was at a forward operating base in northern Syria. The region was a geopolitical nightmare, a gray zone where government forces, rebels, extremist militias, and international interests intertwined in bloody chaos. Her team's mission was simple on paper: infiltrate, locate a high-value intelligence target, and extract without engagement. Ghost operation. Get in and out without leaving traces. Sarah commanded a team of 8 elite operators, each one a veteran with at least a decade of experience in combat zones. They had trained together for years, trusted each other with their lives, functioned as a single lethal and precise organism. Intelligence indicated the target, codenamed Scorpion, was hiding in an abandoned village 40 kilometers from the Turkish border. The plan was to execute the operation during the total darkness window between 2 and 4 in the morning, when enemy surveillance was most relaxed and air support could provide coverage if necessary. Everything was planned with surgical precision. Infiltration and exfiltration routes mapped, contingency points established, and encrypted communication protocols activated. Sarah personally reviewed every detail 3 times. She left nothing to chance. Never did. The infiltration began as planned. 2 hours before midnight, the team was inserted by helicopter 15 kilometers from the target. They walked through rocky and harsh terrain, using night vision and maintaining absolute radio silence except for minimal coded signals. The weather was in their favor: no moon, thick clouds, low temperature that reduced thermal signatures. Sarah led the formation with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of that type of terrain. At her 28 years, she had already conducted more night operations in hostile territory than most commanders would in an entire career.
They reached the observation position at 2:14 in the morning. The village was silent, apparently deserted as intelligence had predicted. Low concrete constructions deteriorated by time, narrow dirt streets, some abandoned vehicles rusting under the weather. Through surveillance equipment, Sarah could see the target building, a 2-story structure in the center of the village, slightly better preserved than the others. 2 sentries at the main entrance, predictable patrol pattern, no signs of advanced electronic security systems. Everything seemed exactly as it should be, and that was exactly what made Sarah narrow her eyes with suspicion. It was too easy. She activated satellite command to confirm updated intelligence. The response came in less than 2 minutes. Confirmed. Target on location. Proceed with neutralization. Sarah made a silent gesture, and her team moved like shadows between the constructions. The approach was perfect. In 8 minutes, they were positioned around the target building, each operator covering a specific angle, ready to execute coordinated entry. Sarah gave the signal. 3, 2, 1. Doors were opened simultaneously, stun grenades detonated inside the building, screams in Arabic exploded in the night silence. The team entered like an unstoppable wave. The first floor was cleared in 40 seconds. 3 hostiles neutralized, no friendly casualties. But the target wasn't there. Sarah pointed upward, and half the team climbed the stairs in tactical formation, while she and the others maintained perimeter security. That's when everything started to fall apart. The explosion came from the second floor. It wasn't big, it wasn't meant to kill, it was a signal, a trap. Sarah realized immediately. Scorpion had never been there. They had been lured into an ambush. Enemy fire started from all directions, fortified positions that didn't exist on intelligence maps, shooters on rooftops, heavy machine guns that tore through the night with deadly red tracers. Sarah's team was trapped inside the building, cornered, outnumbered by at least 10 to 1. She activated command immediately, requested emergency extraction and air support. The response froze her. Negative. Mission compromised. Abort and exfiltrate by own means. Combat zone too hot for air support. Repeat, negative for support. Sarah stood frozen for 2 seconds that seemed eternal. Around her, her men fought a desperate combat, ammunition being consumed quickly, wounded starting to accumulate. She looked through a destroyed window and saw the siege closing, enemy vehicles arriving, more fighters disembarking, rocket launchers being positioned. If they stayed there, they would all die in minutes. If they tried to flee through the streets, they would be shot down before covering 100 meters. There was no way out. There was no salvation.
That's when she saw it. Southeast of the building, 300 meters away, there was a school. Sarah knew that school from the briefings. She knew it was supposedly abandoned since the beginning of the conflict in the region. But through night vision, she saw something that shouldn't be there. Faint lights, movement in the windows, people, civilians. Dozens of them, refugees in that location seeking protection from the conflict devastating the area. And they were directly in the advanced line of enemy forces coming to corner Sarah's team. Command's order had been clear: exfiltrate by own means. That meant abandon the area immediately, use any available route, prioritize team survival. It meant ignore civilians, ignore secondary targets, ignore anything that wasn't escaping alive. But Sarah knew what would happen. Enemy forces would go to that school. They would use those civilians as human shields, as hostages, as bargaining, or they would simply execute them for fun and propaganda. Sarah had seen it happen before. She had seen the videos, the bodies, the children. She made the decision in 3 seconds. She activated the team radio and gave the order that would destroy her career and almost her life. Change of plans. We're going to the school. We're getting those civilians out. There was a moment of stunned silence. One of her operators, Sergeant Marcus Webb, 15-year veteran, questioned directly, "Lieutenant, our orders are immediate exfiltration. We don't have authorization for civilian engagement. This is direct insubordination." Sarah looked into his eyes through the darkness illuminated by tracers and explosions. "I know exactly what it is. Let's go." They moved through hell. Crossfire from 3 directions, constant explosions, constructions collapsing around them. Sarah led through the most direct path to the school, using smoke and the rubble itself as cover. She lost 1 man on the way, Corporal Rodriguez, hit by mortar shrapnel. There was no time for mourning. No time to recover the body. They continued advancing, because stopping meant dying. They reached the school in 7 minutes that seemed like hours. The doors were barricaded from inside. Sarah shouted in Arabic that they were Americans, that they came to help, that they needed to leave immediately. There was hesitation on the other side, fear, mistrust. She didn't blame them. In that region, uniforms didn't mean salvation, they often meant the opposite. But then one of the doors opened cautiously, and Sarah saw the face of an older woman, eyes wide with terror, holding a small child. Behind her were dozens of others, entire families, elderly, more children. Sarah made quick calculations. There were at least 40 civilians. Her team now had 7 capable operators, ammunition for 10 more minutes of intense combat, no support coming, enemy forces less than 200 meters away and approaching. It was impossible. It was suicide. She gave the orders anyway. Form defensive perimeter. Prepare civilians for movement. We're getting out of here altogether, or none of us gets out. The next 20 minutes were the most intense combat Sarah had ever faced in her life. Her team held impossible positions, shooting with surgical precision, every bullet counting, every second bought with blood and determination. The civilians were organized into groups, the weakest being carried, children in the arms of the strongest. Sarah coordinated everything while shooting, shouting orders, pulling people, pushing others, keeping everyone moving in the direction she had identified as the least deadly. That's when she saw the vehicle. An enemy technical truck with a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the bed, turning the corner directly towards the group of civilians. The gunner was turning the weapon, seconds from opening fire, and shredding all those defenseless bodies. She didn't think. She ran directly towards the vehicle, firing her rifle in controlled bursts. She hit the gunner first, then the driver, then threw a grenade through the open window. The explosion flipped the truck on its side and created a temporary barrier of twisted metal and fire. But the action left her exposed. She felt the impact before hearing the shot. Right shoulder. The pain was absurd, but she didn't fall. She kept moving, kept shooting with her left hand, kept screaming for her team to keep the civilians moving. Sergeant Webb reached her, made an emergency dressing while they still exchanged fire with enemies that seemed to sprout from every shadow. "You're crazy, Lieutenant. Completely crazy." Sarah spit blood and smiled. "I know. Keep moving." They reached the extraction zone Sarah had identified, an open area to the north, dangerously exposed, but large enough for a helicopter to land if someone was insane enough to try. She activated command again, requested emergency extraction with maximum priority code, informed she had 40 civilians under protection and team with multiple casualties. She waited for the response, knowing it would probably be another negative, another order to abandon everything and save only the operators. The voice that responded was different, higher ranked, a colonel she recognized from regional command. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you disobeyed direct exfiltration orders. You engaged unauthorized civilian protection operation. You put your team at extreme risk. You completely compromised mission objectives. Are you aware of this?" Sarah could barely speak, blood loss starting to affect her consciousness. "Yes, sir. I'm aware." The colonel was silent for a moment that seemed infinite. Then, with a tone Sarah couldn't decipher, he said, "Hold that position. Extraction en route. 10 minutes." They were the longest 10 minutes of her life. Her team formed a defensive perimeter around the civilians, spending the last ammunition reserves. Sarah was lying against a concrete wall, Sergeant Webb beside her maintaining pressure on the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She watched the children huddled in the center of the group, some crying, others in shocked silence, all looking at those foreign soldiers as if they were angels or demons, probably not knowing the difference. The sound of rotors came like heavenly music. 2 Black Hawk helicopters descended through a hell of anti-aircraft fire, door gunners lighting up the night with massive suppression while they touched ground long enough to start boarding people. Civilians first, pushed inside by Sarah's operators, then the team's wounded, finally Sarah being practically thrown inside by Webb, who entered right behind. The helicopters took off under heavy fire. One took 2 hits to the tail rotor that almost brought them down, but the pilot managed to keep them in the air long enough to leave the death zone.
Sarah lost consciousness shortly after. She woke up 3 days later in a military hospital in Germany, shoulders surgically reconstructed, entire body aching in ways she didn't know were possible. The first person she saw was Webb, sitting beside the bed with an arm in a cast. He smiled when she opened her eyes. "You did it, Lieutenant. All civilians survived. All teams survived. You did it." Sarah wanted to smile back, but reality hit her like a punch. "And now? What happens now?" Webb lowered his gaze. "Now you face court-martial, insubordination, direct disobedience of orders. They're considering serious charges." The following weeks were a bureaucratic nightmare. Sarah was transferred to the United States as soon as she had medical conditions to travel. She was confined to military quarters while the investigation was conducted. Her lawyer, a JAG major named Thompson, was direct and honest. He explained the situation without beating around the bush. The evidence against her was irrefutable. She had received direct exfiltration orders and completely disobeyed them. She had engaged in unauthorized operation that put her team at extreme risk. She had caused the death of an operator, Corporal Rodriguez, during unsanctioned action. The prosecution had a solid case. The recommended sentence was 15 years of military prison and dishonorable discharge. Sarah listened to everything in silence. She didn't deny anything, didn't try to justify herself. When Thompson finished, she only asked, "And the civilians? Where are they now?" Thompson hesitated before answering. "They were relocated to refugee camps under UN protection. They're safe." Sarah nodded. Then it was worth it. Thompson looked at her with a mixture of frustration and admiration. Lieutenant, do you understand? Your career is over. That you could spend the next 15 years in a cell. Sarah looked through the window at the clean blue sky. I understand, but 40 people are alive because I made the right choice. That's all that matters. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The media started getting leaks about the case. The story spread quickly. Navy SEAL being tried for saving civilians. Details were limited due to the classified nature of the operation, but enough leaked to create a national debate. Some called her a hero who put humanity above cold orders. Others called her a dangerous insubordinate who compromised chain of command and put American soldiers at unnecessary risk. Social media exploded on both sides. Politicians started making statements. Pressure on military command increased every day. Sarah ignored it all. She spent the weeks preparing with Thompson, reviewing every detail of the mission, preparing her testimony. She knew the law wasn't on her side. She knew that she had technically committed grave insubordination, but she also knew she had saved 40 innocent lives. And if she had to choose again, she would do exactly the same. The morning of the trial arrived. Sarah put on her dress uniform for what would probably be the last time before being stripped of her insignias and decorations. She was transported to the base where the court-martial would be held. The courtroom was packed. High-ranking officers, credentialed media, military observers. The 3 generals who would form the judge panel entered, and everyone stood. The presiding judge, a 3-star general named Morrison, was known for being merciless with matters of military discipline. The process began with formal reading of charges: grave insubordination, direct disobedience of orders during combat operation, putting military personnel at unnecessary risk, causing the death of American soldier through unauthorized action. Each word fell like a hammer. Sarah remained standing, neutral expression, accepting each charge without flinching. When asked how she pleaded, she responded with firm voice, "Guilty of all charges as stated." A murmur went through the room. Thompson had advised against pleading guilty, arguing they should contest the interpretation of orders and mitigating circumstances, but Sarah had been inflexible. She had disobeyed orders. She was guilty. Lying about it would dishonor everything she had fought for. General Morrison looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Lieutenant Mitchell, do you understand the consequences of pleading guilty to these charges?" Sarah stared directly at him. "Yes, sir, I understand perfectly." The prosecution presented its case methodically. Communication recordings showing direct exfiltration orders being given and ignored. Intelligence reports showing the civilian rescue operation wasn't authorized. Testimony from superior officers confirming Sarah had acted completely outside protocol. Corporal Rodriguez had died not during the original mission, but during the unauthorized rescue action. His family was present in the courtroom, and Sarah felt the weight of their stares every minute. Then came the defense's turn. Thompson called members of Sarah's team to testify. Sergeant Webb took the stand first. He described the situation on the ground with precise details: the ambush, the siege, the school full of civilians, the impossible decision. When asked if he thought Lieutenant Mitchell had put the team at unnecessary risk, Webb responded without hesitation. "She put us at risk for a necessary reason. There were 40 civilians, including children, about to be massacred. If we had fled, we'd be alive, but would have to live knowing we left them to die. The lieutenant gave us the chance to be soldiers and humans at the same time. I would follow her again without hesitation."
Other team members gave similar testimonies. All acknowledged Sarah's action had been technically insubordination. All stated they would do the same again. When Thompson called Sarah to testify in her own defense, she walked to the stand knowing the next words would define how the rest of her life would be remembered. Thompson guided her through the night's events. Sarah described everything with clinical clarity: the ambush, the exfiltration orders, the sight of civilians in the school, the decision. When Thompson asked why she had chosen to disobey direct orders, Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "I took an oath when I became a SEAL. I swore to protect my country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I swore to defend the Constitution. But before that, before I enlisted, I was just a person. And that person believes there are things more important than following orders, believes there are moments where you need to choose between doing what you're told and doing what's right. That night,
I chose. I knew the consequences. I knew I was ending my career. But I also knew that if I fled, if I left those people to die because it wasn't my mission to save them, I would never be able to look in the mirror again. I would never be able to wear this uniform with honor again. She paused, swallowing the emotion that threatened to break her voice. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I disobeyed orders. That's insubordination. I accept the consequences. But I also want it clear that I would do it all again. Because saving 40 innocent lives, especially children, isn't a mistake. It's the only right thing there is. And if the law says otherwise, then the law is wrong. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the prosecutor seemed speechless. General Morrison looked at Sarah for a long moment before dismissing her back to her seat. The trial continued with closing arguments, but everyone knew those words from Sarah had defined everything. The judge panel retired to deliberate. Sarah waited for 3 hours that seemed like 3 years. When they were finally called back to the courtroom, she was prepared to hear the sentence. 15 years, dishonor, the end of everything. She was at peace with it. General Morrison stood up, the entire room following. He looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. General Mitchell, this panel deliberated extensively on your case. The evidence of insubordination is indisputable. You disobeyed direct orders during combat operation. You put your team in extreme danger through unauthorized action. By technical definition, you committed one of the gravest violations of military code. He paused for what seemed eternal. However, this panel also recognizes that you faced an unprecedented situation, an impossible choice between legal duty and moral imperative, and you chose to save 40 innocent civilian lives at the cost of your own career and freedom. You demonstrated extraordinary bravery, exceptional leadership under fire, and an adherence to humanitarian principles that represent the best of what this country stands for. Sarah wasn't understanding. The general continued. Therefore, this panel has decided as follows. Regarding the charges of grave insubordination, you are found guilty as declared. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the outcome of your actions, the sentence is suspended. You will not face prison. Furthermore, for act of extraordinary bravery and sacrifice above and beyond duty, you are being recommended for the Silver Star Medal. The room exploded in reaction. Some applauded, others protested, reporters shouted questions. Sarah just stood there, unable to process what she had just heard. Webb was openly crying behind her. General Morrison banged the gavel demanding order. When silence returned, he concluded. Lieutenant Mitchell, you violated orders but honored greater values. You compromised military discipline but demonstrated moral leadership. This is a complex case that challenged every principle this court represents. But in the end, we decided that actions that save innocent lives, even when technically insubordinate, deserve recognition, not punishment. You are dismissed with honors. Sarah saluted, still in shock. When the generals left, her team surrounded her, hugging, laughing, crying. Webb was openly crying behind her. Outside the courtroom, a crowd had gathered. When Sarah emerged, the ovation was deafening. There were veterans, military families, ordinary civilians, all applauding, shouting her name. But the moment she would never forget came 3 days later. She was called to a private ceremony at a small military base. When she entered the room, she saw a group of people she didn't immediately recognize. Then an older woman approached, the same woman who had opened the school door that night. Behind her were other familiar faces, the civilians, the families she had saved. Through a translator, the woman spoke. My name is Amira. You saved my granddaughter that night.
You saved all of us. There were no words in the languages we speak to thank you enough. But we wanted you to know that every day we live now, every smile from our children, every moment of peace we have, exists because you chose to see us as humans worthy of being saved. You are our hero forever. Sarah hugged Amira and finally allowed the tears to come. All the weeks of tension, fear, uncertainty poured out as she held that woman who represented the reason she had risked everything. When they finally separated, Sarah looked at the children present, alive, playing, laughing, completely oblivious to how close they had come to never having those laughs. 3 months later, Sarah officially received the Silver Star Medal in a public ceremony. Her uniform now carried the decoration that very few operators had ever received. She was back on active duty, but something had changed. Her story had spread throughout the armed forces. It had become a case study in military academies, a debate about where obedience ends and where conscience begins. Some still criticized her, arguing she had set a dangerous precedent of soldiers disobeying orders when they thought they were right. Others celebrated her as an example that humanity cannot be sacrificed at the altar of military discipline. Sarah didn't care about either side. She had done what needed to be done. She had saved 40 lives. And that was all that mattered.
Years later, when reporters still occasionally asked about that night, Sarah always responded the same way. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a person who had to make an impossible choice and chose to live with the consequences. Any other soldier on my team would have done the same. We don't wear this uniform to follow orders blindly. We wear it to protect lives. And that's exactly what we did." Corporal Rodriguez, the man she lost that night, was posthumously decorated for bravery. His family said publicly they didn't blame Sarah, that they knew he had died doing exactly what he would have chosen to do: save innocence. His name is engraved on a memorial that Sarah visits every year. The story of Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell isn't about simple heroism or clear villainy. It's about the impossible space between orders and conscience, between legal duty and moral imperative, between the soldier you're trained to be and the human you can't stop being. It's about the fact that sometimes, very rarely, moments arise where you have to decide who you really are. And Sarah decided. She decided that saving lives was worth more than following orders. Decided that 40 innocent civilians deserved risking everything. Decided that the uniform she wore wasn't just about obeying commands, but about protecting the defenseless. She went from accused in a court-martial to decorated with one of the highest military honors, not because the law changed, but because even the most rigid military system recognized there are things greater than regulations. There are moments where the only true insubordination would be not to act. And somewhere, in a protected refugee camp, 40 people live their lives knowing there are soldiers who don't see them just as missions or statistics, but as human beings worthy of being saved. Children who grow up, who go to school, who will have their own families one day. All because one woman decided that some orders are meant to be broken when lives are at stake. Sarah Mitchell continues serving to this day. She trains new operators, passes on her experiences, and always ends her lectures the same way. She tells the young SEALs gathered before her, eyes shining with determination and inexperience, "You will receive many orders in your career. Most of them you should follow without question. Discipline is what keeps us alive, what makes us effective. But if someday you face a choice between following orders and saving innocent lives, I hope you're brave enough to choose what's right. And I will stand beside you when you face the consequences." Some say that night in Syria changed Sarah Mitchell forever, that she lost something of her operational hardness, of her ability to make the cold choices that special missions require. But those who really know her know the truth. She didn't lose anything that night. She gained something much more valuable. She gained the absolute certainty that in the end, when all medals are awarded and all reports filed, the only thing that really matters is whether you can sleep at night knowing you did what was right. Military manuals will never teach what Sarah did. Academies will never officially recommend disobeying direct orders, and they shouldn't. Military discipline is essential, chain of command is fundamental, following orders is what separates professional armed forces from chaotic militias. But Sarah proved there's a level above discipline, a level where morality survives when all other rules are tested to the limit, a level where you finally discover if you're wearing the uniform to serve regulations or to serve values. The medal she carries on her chest isn't made of metal. It's made of 40 lives, 40 stories that continue being written because she chose to see them as more important than her career. It's made of all the time she closes her eyes and sees not the faces of killed enemies, but the faces of children who continue laughing. It's made of the certainty that when everything ends, when her body finally fails, and her story becomes just one more among millions, she can say she chose humanity above obedience. And that's a decoration no court-martial can take away. Rodriguez's family, the man who died on that mission, maintains contact with Sarah to this day. On the anniversary of his death, they gather at the memorial where his name is engraved, and every year, Rodriguez's mother hugs Sarah and says the same thing. "My son died doing what he loved, protecting people who needed it. You gave him that chance. Thank you." And Sarah cries because she knows that death weighs on her, that it will never stop weighing, but she also knows Rodriguez would have made the same choice she made. In elite military circles, there's a phrase that started circulating after Sarah Mitchell's case. When someone is facing an impossible decision, when orders don't make moral sense, when the right choice will cost everything, other operators say, "Do like Mitchell did. Choose to live with the consequences of having saved lives." It's not official, it's not approved, but it exists. Whispered in briefing rooms, murmured among veterans, informally taught from generation to generation. A reminder that behind every uniform, every insignia, every weapon, there's a human being who eventually has to decide what those things mean. She doesn't consider herself a hero. When young girls write to her saying they want to be like her, Sarah responds honestly. She says that being like her means carrying impossible weight, making decisions that will haunt you, losing people you love, and living knowing one mistake can cost everything. But it also means having the strength to do the right thing even when it's easier to look the other way. Means understanding that courage isn't absence of fear, it's acting despite it. And means that sometimes you have to risk your own future to give a future to other people. Her case changed some things in military protocol. Not officially, because admitting that would be legitimizing insubordination, but behind the scenes, in classified documents, in high-level strategy discussions, now there's a clause, a small opening, an acknowledgement that there may be situations where saving civilians takes precedence over operational objectives. It's vague on purpose. It's rarely invoked, but it exists. And it exists because Sarah Mitchell proved there was a need for it. She's been promoted since then. She's now a captain. Some say she should be more, that her deeds deserve stars on her shoulders. Others say she was lucky not to be in Leavenworth. Sarah doesn't care about either. She does her job, trains her team, and every night before sleeping, she thinks about the 40 people who are alive because she decided human lives are worth more than blindly following orders. There's a photo on her desk. It was taken 3 years after that night in Syria. It shows Sarah surrounded by children in a refugee camp. The same children she saved, now older, smiling, alive. One of them, a girl named Yasmin, is holding a drawing she made. It's a woman in uniform holding children's hands. Underneath, in clumsy Arabic and English, it's written, "My soldier angel." Sarah looks at that photo every day. On bad days when memories weigh too much, when the shoulder that was hit hurts, when she thinks of Rodriguez and everything that could have gone wrong, she looks at that photo and remembers why it's worth it. The story of the lieutenant who became accused and then hero doesn't have a clean ending. There's no inspiring music playing in the background, no credits rolling, no perfect resolution. Sarah still wakes up at night sometimes sweating, reliving that night, thinking about what she could have done differently. Still carries guilt for Rodriguez's death, still questions whether she risked too much, whether she could have saved everyone another way, but then she remembers the 40 lives, remembers the faces,
remembers that imperfect action that saves lives is infinitely better than perfect inaction that lets them die. And that's what she hopes her story teaches. Not that disobeying orders is heroic, not that military discipline doesn't matter, but that there are moments, rare and terrible, where you have to choose between being a good soldier and being a good person. And in those moments, you discover who you really are. Sarah discovered she's someone who can't watch children die when she has power to save them. Discovered she prefers facing prison than living with the cowardice of having fled when she could help. Discovered that the uniform she wears means protecting the vulnerable, not just following commands. Today, when young operators go through SEAL training, at some point they hear about the Mitchell case. Never officially, never in a classroom, but in hallways, in bars after training, in late-night conversations between veterans and recruits, the story is told. And it always ends the same way, with a question. What would you have done? If it were you at that school, surrounded with orders to flee and save only your team, but seeing dozens of civilians about to die, what would you have done? Most young soldiers say they would have saved the civilians. Sarah always smiles when she hears that. It's easy to say when you're not there, when it's not your future at stake, when it's not your men dying around you. But she hopes that if the moment comes, they have the courage of their own convictions. Sarah Mitchell's legacy isn't in manuals or regulations. It's in every operator who faces a moral choice and remembers that someone before them chose right and survived to tell the story. It's in every life saved because a soldier decided that protecting innocence matters more than following orders to the letter. It's in the living proof that you can challenge the system for the right reasons, and the system, eventually, will recognize you were right. She didn't save the world that night. She saved 40 people. For many, that doesn't seem like much, a drop in the ocean of suffering that is a war zone. But for those 40 people, for their families, for the generations that will exist because they survived, Sarah saved the entire world. And in the end, maybe that's what heroism really means. Not saving everyone, but saving someone when you absolutely can. When ignoring would be easier. When doing the right thing will cost everything. Sarah Mitchell entered that court-martial expecting prison and left with a medal. But the real decoration isn't the medal she wears. It's the knowledge that when tested to the absolute limit, when forced to choose between career and conscience, she chose right, and 40 people are alive to prove it. That's the kind of victory no court can give or take. It's the victory of looking in the mirror and recognizing the person looking back. It's the victory of living with honor, not because you followed rules, but because you followed something greater. Something that survives when all orders are forgotten and all regulations gather dust. The simple and complicated truth that human lives matter, and sometimes you have to risk everything to prove it.